Shadows fall early across Whitehall as the winter of 1546 seizes London in a bone-deep chill. The great palace, once alive with music and laughter, trembles under a strange quiet, the sense that something vast is ending. You move along the candle-lit corridors, the air thick with secrecy, and every step seems muffled by the weight of a dying epoch. At the center of this looming darkness lies Henry VIII, King of England, who now passes his days unseen and almost unheard, his presence more spectral than sovereign. The king, once a virile figure who amazed Europe with jousting prowess and thunderous proclamations, now commands mostly from his bed. Servants exchange wary glances as they pass his chamber. Whispers circle. The king's legs are so ulcerated the stench permeates even thick tapestries. He demands ever more layers of fur and cloth, yet shivers uncontrollably. You watch as those who serve him approach with hesitance, knowing a careless word or unsteady look could mean exile, or far worse. This is not the Henry who ruled by force of will, but rather a haunted monarch, left alone with his ghosts and his pain. A significant event unfolds in the closing days of December. Foreign ambassadors petition for audience, hungry for clues to the future. Henry, unpredictable and clouded by fevers, offers only cryptic replies. Some tales say that he rages at the French and Spanish, seeing betrayal in every gesture and intention. The once mighty ruler, who broke with Rome and dissolved the monasteries, now fights shadows rather than enemies. The psychological collapse is as apparent as the physical. The king, obsessed for years with legacy, realizes the world he forged now flickers beyond his grip. Yet there's an odd, lesser-known detail that shivers through palace talk. Some servants, it said, avoid passing his door at midnight, terrified of moans, real or imagined, coming from within. A chronicler records that Henry has started muttering to himself in the dark, rehearsing arguments and regrets like a shattered priest. Some say he speaks to long-departed figures, Cardinal Wolsey, Anne Boleyn, even his beloved early advisor Sir Thomas More. What precisely he says, no one outside his closest retainers can confirm. Historians have endlessly debated the psychological makeup of this final Henry. Was he breaking down beneath the accumulated weight of his deeds, or clinging stubbornly to royal self-delusion? Some biographers suggest he was lucid until the end, a master manipulator calculating every final move. Others argue these claims are palace propaganda, that the king's mind, like his body, was rotting, his nights plagued by dread and self-reproach rather than statecraft. Outside, the city endures the winter gloom. The court instinctively senses change. You sense it too. The world breathes uneasily, as if holding back until this king's story, at once magnificent and monstrous, finally lets go its grip. Through it all, Henry remains both present and absent, an immense presence hovering in the half-dark, unreachable, unpredictable, and in these last days more terrifying in his isolation than he ever was in his rage. Beneath the trappings of ancient power, the heart of the Tudor lion beats erratically, its owner both king and captive, staring into the abyss of his own making. All of England waits, frozen in fear and expectation, as Henry VIII, the shadow over Whitehall, endures one last winter nightmare. The door to Henry's chamber opens with a reluctant creak, and you step into the fetid gloom. The king lies swaddled in silks and furs on a massive bed, but grandeur can't disguise decay. The stench is overwhelming, a sour, sickly blend of sweat, spoiled flesh, and desperate attempts at masking perfumes. This is the private world of Henry's last days, where every breath is a battle and every movement a harrowing ordeal. His legs, grotesquely swollen, ooze from wounds that refuse to heal. Once the king rode for hours on the hunt. Now his body rebels at even the pressure of sheets. Doctors debate leechings, poultices, and potions, present remedies as theater, and whisper about gangrene beyond help. Through the thick velvet curtains the world grows narrower. Henry's courtiers, once eager to surround him, increasingly find reasons to linger elsewhere, fearing his wrath, but perhaps more terrified of his decline. Servants enter his chamber rarely, and only with explicit orders. Some mutter prayers upon leaving the king's side, crossing themselves against the pollution of imminent death, or perhaps the corruption of proximity to absolute power as it melts away. Psychologically, Henry is besieged as much by terror as by pain. The throne itself becomes a prison, His mind, sharp and suspicious by nature, begins to loop endlessly over betrayals real and imagined. Every minor mishap, each careless exchange between his counselors, is seen as a potential plot. His old friend and minister, Sir Anthony Denny, becomes his near-constant attendant, privy to outbursts in which the king rails at traitors who may not exist outside his fevered mind. The significant event casting a deepening shadow is the Christmas of 1546. For the first time, the royal revels are muted. Traditional feasts and masques are cancelled or gravely subdued at the king's command. Henry will not be seen. The Queen, Catherine Parr, visits quietly, reading scripture to him in solemn tones. He listens, head turned away, as if words from the Book of Psalms might ward off not just death, but the growing fear of his own verdict in the afterlife. There is, in this moment, a small yet telling detail overlooked by many chroniclers. Henry orders mirrors removed from his rooms. Whether to avoid glimpsing his own corrupted reflection or to discourage sorcerous mischief. Mirrors are, after all, rumored to trap dying souls remains unclear. His dread of being watched even by himself intensifies. Some speculate it's simply about vanity, but others sense a deeper horror, a king confronting a physical ending as undignified as any commoner's. Debate endures among historians over these strange precautions. Was Henry, the ultimate narcissist, now unable to face his own ruination? Or, given the era's credulity about superstition, was he warding off dark omens in hopes of bargaining for more days? Reports differ. Even the famous chronicler Edward Hall hints at both possibilities. Careful to flatter, yet leaving gaps for the discerning to read between the lines. This claustrophobic panic is not just Henry's, it infects the whole palace. Scribes rush to finish legal documents under flickering candlelight, each imagining that a misstep might invite royal fury or contribute to disaster when the inevitable comes. Paranoia leaks outward, billowing from the king's bedchamber until it curls like smoke through the salons and corridors of Whitehall. To watch Henry here, crippled and surrounded by sycophants and shadows, is to witness a man obsessed not only with survival, but with the desperate illusion of control. The rot is not merely in his body, but in his sense of self, authority, and reality. The great king is now captive to both his own mind and the poison seeping through his flesh, and everyone at court can feel the terror of that unraveling. In the corridors just beyond Henry's fetid chamber, a different kind of terror simmers. You sense the eyes of courtiers, sharp and hungry, flickering with calculation behind courteous bows. The king's reign, once characterized by cunning and brute force, now invites a more insidious power play, a silent race to survive, or even thrive, after Henry draws his final agonized breaths. The political atmosphere is suffocating. Councillors and nobles, from the Duke of Norfolk to the rising star Edward Seymour, move warily, their words measured and eyes wary in every conversation. Alliances built over decades seem suddenly brittle, liable to shatter on the king's next whim, or at the delivery of a single fatal letter. It's clear to you that Henry's famed authority has begun to lose its terror in his absence from public view, and in that vacuum, ambition grows more dangerous and more desperate. A significant event emblematic of these times unfolds on a gray January morning. You watch as royal messengers summon Thomas Howard, the old Duke of Norfolk, once one of the most privileged men in the kingdom, to the Tower on charges of treason. His son, Henry Howard, Earl of Surrey, has already been executed mere days before, blood spilled fresh on the snowy stones. The king, increasingly convinced of conspiracies, orders this ancient pillar of nobility destroyed. Norfolk begs for mercy, but there is no mercy left. It is the machinery of power, lubricated by fear and jealousy, grinding once more. But beyond these public acts of violence, small, telling moments abound. Henry's most trusted attendants, like Denny and the physician Dr. Butts, now linger longer than custom dictates after leaving the king's bedside, huddling in anxious conversation. They do not discuss the king's comfort or his soul, but strategize, placing their bets. Who will control the Privy Council? Which prince will the regency back? Can they escape the fate of so many before them, swept away once Henry's wrath no longer serves as the ultimate deterrent? A lesser-known insight reveals itself in these hushed gatherings, a growing palpable disdain for the king himself. You catch the quick, nervous jokes that Henry can no longer see them, the muttered predictions that he will outlast us all and haunt Whitehall. What is left to these men is not loyalty, but raw, defensive instinct. The monarch who ruled by sharing his favor now rules only by the inertia of fear, and that fear is beginning to slip away. Historians still argue over the extent of the treason conspiracy against the Howards. Was it fabricated by Henry's circle to distract from courtly fractures? Or was there truth, a last-ditch Catholic plot perhaps, behind the accusations? Some claim documents are forged, others point to cryptic letters and the Howards' undeniable ambition. The ambiguity, though, mirrors the greater psychological climate of these closing days. Truth is slippery, motives twisted by terror, and survival secured only by ruthless silence. Sometimes at night, the light from the great hall spills across deserted galleries to the door of Henry's chamber. The sound of laughter, far less frequent now, has a brittle edge, a nervous energy. Those who remain at court turn inward, hoarding secrets, aware that a wrong word might spark their own fall. You notice courtiers avoiding both confrontation and comfort, each hoping to cross the chasm between this reign and the next without stumbling into disaster. Henry's decline does not make him less dangerous. Instead, it tears away the last veneer of chivalry and pageantry, exposing the base instincts that have always churned beneath the Tudor throne: suspicion, calculated cruelty, and a willingness to destroy allies and enemies alike. The king's pain and paranoia act as wildfire, terrifying even as his strength wanes, and you realize the most perilous storms are not those Henry stirs, but those about to break when he is finally gone. As the stone-cold nights stretch on, you sense Henry's world contracting further, the air inside Whitehall thickening with foreboding and superstition. The king's bed, a fortress against the world, becomes a haunted cell. Sleep, when it comes, brings little relief. You hear stories whispered among the night watch, that Henry, once so mighty, now sometimes wakes in fits of terror, calling out in confusion and grief. His voice, once a thunderclap that silenced rooms, trembles and cracks. The palace hushes to listen. One specific night, so the rumor goes, a servant stumbles from the king's chamber, eyes wide with horror. He was speaking with the ghosts, the man says, clutching a talisman to his chest. Anne Boleyn stood beside his bed. The tale spreads. Anne, doomed queen, comes not in anger, but with a sad, reproachful gaze. Sometimes it is Catherine Howard, her youthful laughter grown chill. Other times the cries are less distinct. Shadowy supplications to Wolsey, to More, to those executed at Henry's command. Each night is another battlefield, and in the pale light of dawn, the king's face appears sunken with exhaustion, as if he has indeed spent hours wrestling with accusers from beyond the grave. The significant historical fact underpinning these rumors arrives quietly yet unmistakably. In these final weeks, Henry orders that all those around him must speak only in whispers after dark. He claims it's for his rest, but you catch the underlying tension, less to soothe than to prevent any words from rousing the phantoms that haunt his thoughts. His religious uncertainty grows too. Catherine Parr reads to him endlessly from the Bible, and Henry listens greedily, desperate for signs of forgiveness. This, you realize, is not the swaggering king who dissolved the monasteries, but a soul struggling with the terror of his own damnation. There is a darker, lesser-known detail that chills the spine. Those in the king's confidence recount strange moments, Henry in sudden lucidity, asking, almost begging, for lists of names of those he executed, then lingering long minutes over certain entries. Some believe him to be gloating, but if you think the king is tallying debts that can never be paid, reading by candlelight the proof of his own damnation. A nurse later confides that on certain nights, Henry weeps openly, speaking only to the shadows. Among scholars, debate rages about the veracity of these ghostly encounters. Is this Henry's guilt, made manifest by fever and fatigue? Or are these tales embellishments, stories spun by terrified servants eager to explain away the king's increasingly disturbing behavior? Some posit that Henry, always attuned to the value of legend, might even cultivate fear around his person, making himself a mythic figure in death, as he had tried in life. Yet the persistence of these stories, spreading from Whitehall to London streets, signals something real. Whether ghosts exist or not, a haunted conscience can be more terrifying than any mortal adversary. The palace itself seems to groan beneath the weight of these secrets. Each night drowns in velvet blackness, candle flames flickering as if stirred by unseen hands. Even the great chroniclers like Holinshed admit uncertainty, writing that what truly passed in Henry's last nights will always be shadowed by fear and rumor. But you do not need documentation to sense the atmosphere. It is thick with dread, remorse, and the unspoken question: how will a king who made England tremble answer for what he has done? The line between life and death blurs. Once Henry's name alone was the threat. Now, in the grip of nightmares and whispered guilt, he is both prisoner and judge at a trial only his conscience can convene. As you watch the flickering images of the past, screaming queens, severed heads, betrayed friends, dance on his chamber walls, never letting him rest, never granting peace, you move through Whitehall as tension coils tighter with each step, every shadow holding its breath. In the final weeks, Henry's dread is no longer passive. It sharpens into frantic action, his mind lurching between suspicion and desperation. He seizes what power remains to him, determined that not even death will wrest control from his grasp. The king's word, though slurred by pain and hunger for sleep, still carries the authority to make or break any man, and you see even old confidants flinch when summoned. A significant upheaval shakes the palace: the arrest and near execution of William Paget, Henry's trusted secretary. Having grown too close to reformist counselors, Paget finds himself suddenly accused of treason on the king's command. In the private gloom of Henry's chamber, the king's voice is hoarse but decisive. Paget, still loyal, prostrates himself and pleads for mercy. At the last moment Henry relents, but the message rings clear: no one, regardless of past devotion, stands above suspicion. The court reels, nervously realigning allegiances in reaction to this arbitrary reprieve. A growing psychological insight emerges in these days, a desperate paranoia fused to a king who, feeling his own end, strives to shape what comes after. Henry has always feared betrayal, but now his every waking moment revolves around the possibility. Old friends and fresh rivals alike stagger beneath constant scrutiny. He grants the right to bear arms one day, then rescinds it the next, one moment bestowing gifts upon a valued counselor, and the next denouncing them as a fifth columnist. Power no longer flows in measured edicts but in spasms, as if his hands reach to crush invisible enemies before it is too late. One lesser-known but revealing instance. Rumors that Henry had scribes destroy certain incriminating documents, correspondences, secret confessions, perhaps lists of enemies compiled in earlier, bloodier years. You hear mutterings among clerks, stories of papers vanishing in secret nighttime burnings. Some say these actions are Henry's attempt to erase proof of his cruelties. Others insist he's more concerned with protecting his legacy, fearful of having his failures exposed by the next regime. Whatever the reason, fear pulsates through the administrative heart of the court. Yet what drives these frenzied purges? Here, historians clash. Some argue that Henry's actions are the cunning of a master predator aware of his vulnerability. Method, not madness, shuffling the pieces to guarantee the triumph of his chosen heirs. Others see chaos, the flailing of a mind undone by pain, guilt, and fear, honing suspicion to a razor's edge. Surviving records are ambiguous, sometimes contradicting even themselves. The truth may be that Henry is both, sharp in flashes, deranged in others, increasingly unable to tell friend from foe. This late-stage fear radiates outward. Trusted figures, Sir Anthony Denny, Archbishop Cranmer, and the Seymour brothers, hold anxious counsel away from the king's bedside, plotting how to shield themselves if Henry's dying orders spiral into daylight violence. Even Queen Catherine Parr, accused in an anonymous letter of heresy, faces the king's mounting distrust. For days she is denied access to Henry, likely fearing the fate of his earlier wives. Only her quick mind and Henry's weakening body save her from the scaffold. Through it all, the king's control slips with every gasp and every whispered accusation. You see the terror in counselors' eyes, terror not of Henry's wrath, but of what will unfold once the king is finally irrevocably gone. The late-night purges and desperate accusations are more than the acts of a dying tyrant. They are a court's last convulsion, a world convulsing on the edge of dissolution, determined to keep secrets buried, and silence just as total as the grave Henry so desperately tries to delay. The torches in Whitehall sputter as scribes, counselors, and royal doctors hurry up and down the winding passages, shadows fluttering across paneled walls. In these suffocating final days, The king's obsessions turn single-mindedly toward his legacy, his will, his succession. The crown must not slip through hands unworthy or opposing. You watch as the court, strung out with anxiety, hangs on to every decree. Henry's relentless will, felt for decades as a storm of certainty, now feels like a quivering fever. The historical heart of these days lies in the creation and revision of Henry's final will. For weeks, sometimes during pain-racked bursts of lucidity, sometimes in fits of confusion, Henry dictates amendments, cancels appointments, and orders fresh drafts. The succession is clear in theory. His young son Edward is to inherit, and in the event of Edward's death, then his daughters Mary and Elizabeth in strict order. But as Henry's grip weakens, his mouth floods with contradictions. You see his lawyers, Edward Seymour and William Paget among them, hovering nervously by candlelight, their quills trembling as they revise and rewrite each clause. A significant event shakes the room. The gathering of the royal council to witness and, some say, guide the king's final wishes. They present the king with papers, but Henry is barely able to hold the pen or articulate the words. It is Anthony Denny, chief gentleman of the Privy Chamber, who speaks closest to Henry's ear, translating mutterings into dictates of state. The signature, perhaps a shaky scrawl, perhaps the work of Denny guiding the king's hand, perhaps even a stamp pressed in Henry's absence, remains a focus of lasting suspicion. What exactly did the dying king mean to order? And what did his counselors, already jockeying for the power vacuum, permit to appear in the final document? Here, a fascinating and deep psychological insight emerges. Henry, conscious both of his immense power and his imminent helplessness, oscillates between moments of grand command and utter confusion. He wants desperately to be immortal, to fix England forever in his image. Yet at the same time is haunted by the knowledge that his heirs are divided, his council split by faction, his own reputation forever shadowed by blood. Was this the masterstroke of a calculating tyrant, preparing every last contingency by ensuring his own son's succession? Or the pained flailing of a man who trusts no one, not even himself, to secure his legacy? Historians argue still on these points. Some hold that the king, even dying and delirious, steered the process, playing counselors against each other, ensuring the Protestant Seymour family would dominate after his death. Others insist that Henry was merely a name by the end, his will manipulated shamelessly by those around him. The original signed copy of the will, it is worth noting, vanished not many years later, replaced by a transcript of questionable accuracy. Did Henry's hand guide England's future as he always intended, or did the balance of power slip away in the dying hours, determined by men more alive than him? A lesser-known contextual detail floats through conversation. The king's last secret suggestion that Mary and Elizabeth, once declared illegitimate, be restored in line for the throne, though still regarded warily. No matter what language appears in the will, you sense the unmistakable unease of courtiers, who know the Tudor bloodline remains perilously thin and uncertain. Even those meant to benefit from Henry's choices fret. Any slip in the next weeks, any whiff of old treason, could cost them everything. It's in these moments that the terror in Whitehall crests. The king, half delirious, issues contradictory orders. Men like Edward Seymour and John Dudley plan each conversation as if their lives hang in the balance. They do. You catch fragments of anxious whispers. If he dies before this is settled, all is lost. Every signature is double-checked. Every lock on every strongbox is tested twice. The king's will, still warm with confusion, splits the kingdom between factions already nursing old hatreds. In this living nightmare, legacy and survival have become one and the same. The January wind moans high above Whitehall, rattling leaded panes as all within brace for a reckoning neither deniable nor fully anticipated. Now, in Henry's last days, the royal chamber becomes a theater of agony and delusion. You stand outside his door and hear what remains of his voice, intermittent cries that sometimes disintegrate into garbled prayers, alternating with curses hurled at imagined traitors. It is not simply that the king grows weaker, though his body is clearly failing. His flesh is mottled and pale, his once barrel chest sunken, as rattling breaths betray the struggle within. Leg ulcers, now infected beyond hope, are dressed daily by grim-faced doctors, who agree privately that healing is impossible. His appetite, once famous, has evaporated. Each swallow is a torment, each draught of wine a bid to momentarily numb the pain. In this state, a significant historical moment unfolds. The king, hours from death, is visited one final time by Archbishop Thomas Cranmer. Henry clings to the ultimate sacrament, demanding the assurance of salvation. Unable to speak, the king grips Cranmer's hand with surprising force, signaling by this gesture alone what words cannot: fear, supplication, perhaps a desperate hope for forgiveness. The dying monarch, in full view of friend and foe alike, is reduced to the most elemental human terror: what awaits when the last breath ebbs. A subtle, lesser-known insight emerges from this scene. Those who serve Henry so closely observe that he repeatedly asks, even in delirium, "Will God pardon me?" Sometimes he mistakes his nurse for a long-departed queen, reaching for her with shaking hands, whispering names: Jane, Anne, Wolsey. At other times he seems to forget who he is, lapsing into childhood prayers or muttering in Latin. Occasionally lucidity breaks the fever, sudden flashes of kingly command ordering guards, calling for counselors, then fading again into fretful silence. You sense the boundaries between Henry and his victims, his past selves, his friends, his enemies, are melting. Historians forever debate what crossed Henry's mind behind those closed curtains. Was he at last contrite for decades of violence, or still defiant, the Lion of England to his final breath? Some point to Cranmer's account as proof of penitence. Others cite later reports of Henry's brutal outbursts in his last days, suggesting a mind still raging and unrepentant. Yet all agree on one thing. In his final hours, reality slipped its tether, and the once commanding king drifted between present terror and the overwhelming tide of memory. Around him, the mood in Whitehall curdles into a nightmare of silence and secret hopes. Some wait for a death they dare not discuss. Others nurse private terrors that Henry's last words or cries might doom them if interpreted as a final command. The palace seems to shrink. Tapestries cannot muffle the echo of kingly suffering, and candles gutter fitfully in the polluted air. For Henry, pain reigns supreme. Sometimes the agony is so excruciating he pleads for darkness, demanding no visitors, no sound but his own ragged breathing. A storm of uncertainty rages outside, and within the king is alone, utterly, terribly alone. Henry's world is now measured by the inch-wide bands of light from his chamber window, and by the parade of faces appearing in fevered dreams and moments of tortured wakefulness. Truth and delusion intertwine. Was it truly Anne bending over him in the night, or only the play of shadow and remorse on the curtains? As you linger by the threshold, you recognize a transformation more profound than death itself. The king's power is utterly spent, but his capacity for terror, fear for himself, fear he inspires in others, remains. Henry's last agony is the agony of a shattered soul, a tyrant reduced to flesh and frailty, struggling to meet the enormity of his own legacy. The dawn of January 28, 1547, crawls over London, casting a feeble, fearful light through the grimy windows of Whitehall. A palace maid, pale from sleepless nights, stands as sentry by Henry's door. Within, the chamber is a realm of heavy curtains, extinguished candles, and the sour air of stillness after prolonged suffering. You can almost taste the relief that briefly softens the tension in the corridor, the knowledge that the tyrant's grasp is at last loosening, that every new breath might well be his last. The king, now more corpse than sovereign, breathes in fits and starts, each one shallow, ragged, a sullen defiance of fate. Attendants hover at a delicate remove, caught between duty and dread. A royal apothecary, trembling, checks for signs of consciousness. There are none. Cranmer is summoned, but arrives only minutes before the final gasp, so, as rumor forever repeats, Henry dies without the last rites he had so fervently desired. Even that last comfort is denied him. Whether by timing or intention, historians can only speculate. Some say he squeezed Cranmer's hand as a plea for salvation. Others insist it was a spasm, nothing more. In the sealed, stifling room, the terror is not only of death, but of what follows. Almost as soon as the king's final breath escapes, Whitehall unravels. You witness the tightly coiled court erupt into chaos. Servants scramble to secure doors, counselors whisper in frantic knots, royal doctors issue carefully worded notices. The king's body, too swollen and corrupted for transport, is kept under heavy guard. According to lesser-known accounts, dogs whine and paw at the chamber threshold, as if sensing a malaise that lingers even after the soul has fled. Outside, courtiers who only hours before offered prayers for Henry's recovery now vanish into the city, burning letters and secret lists, erasing any trace of dangerous loyalties. The Seymour brothers, heart-pounding behind wary faces, pull Edward, now king, into their private circle, initiating the first moves of the coming regency. You see panic in the eyes of the old guard, men who staked their futures on the whim of a monarch. Some find themselves locked out of their own offices. Others, desperate, beg for an audience with anyone certain of power. This moment, historians forever argue, is shrouded not just in secrecy, but in deliberate confusion. Official proclamations delay the announcement of the king's death for 2 days, time enough for the Seymour faction to secure its grip, and for any lingering rivals or suspicious documents to be quietly disposed of. Did Henry truly intend for the government, the council, and the regency to unfold as it does? Or is this the purest expression of Tudor terror, the king's end carefully stage-managed to keep England in thrall to dread and uncertainty? A final haunting detail. When Henry's coffin passes through Sion Abbey on its way to burial, a legend is born. The wooden casket, hastily constructed to hold his ruined body, begins to leak. Blood and fluids drip onto the stone floor, and, as folklore quickly claims, a stray dog laps at the spillage. A ghastly echo of a prophecy that Henry, like the biblical King Ahab, would die in disgrace, his remains consumed by dogs. Whether myth or fact, you sense that in this moment, the court's collective fear reaches a fever pitch and then abruptly gives way. Relief, horror, and the first greedy inhale of newfound freedom. In Whitehall's ruined silence, Henry's monstrous shadow lingers. His reign passes not quietly but with waves of panic and scrambling self-preservation. And in the dawn of his death, England holds its breath, shaken by the terror that in the end, even the greatest tyrant must submit to a world he can no longer command.